My name is Penelope, and at 32 years old, I thought I had built the perfect life. I was a successful forensic accountant with my own consulting firm, married to Garrett, a charming investment advisor who swept me off my feet 5 years ago. We lived in a beautiful house in the suburbs, drove luxury cars, and seemed to have everything figured out. But on that rainy Thursday evening in October, when I came home early from a business trip to surprise my husband, I discovered that my entire world was built on lies. What I witnessed that night set in motion a chain of events that would test everything I believed about justice, love, and revenge. If you're watching this now, please like and subscribe as I share how one moment of betrayal led to the most satisfying victory of my life. Looking back, I realized the signs were always there. I just chose not to see them, blinded by what I thought was love, but was actually carefully orchestrated manipulation. Garrett Blackwood was a master at his craft, and I was his most successful long-term project. We met at the Pemberton Charity Gala in March 2018, one of those glittering affairs where San Francisco's elite gathered to write checks and feel good about themselves. I was there reluctantly, having been dragged along by my business partner Miranda, who insisted that networking was essential for growing our forensic accounting firm. You can't build a business hiding behind spreadsheets, Penelope. She had lectured me while helping me pick out a suitable dress. These people have money problems they don't even know about yet. Half of them probably need your services. Miranda was right, of course. Corporate fraud was booming, and high net worth individuals were prime targets for sophisticated financial crimes. But schmoozing wasn't my strong suit. I preferred the clean logic of numbers to the messy complications of human interaction. I was standing near the silent auction display, examining a particularly elaborate vacation package to Tuscany, when a warm baritone voice spoke behind me. The Villa Monte Croce package? I've actually been there. It's even more beautiful than the photos suggest, though I'd recommend going in September rather than July if you want to avoid the crowds. I turned to see a tall, distinguished man with silver-streaked dark hair and the kind of confident smile that suggested he was accustomed to being listened to. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and he wore it with the casual ease of someone who belonged in such expensive clothes. "Have you really been there, or is that just a conversation starter?" I asked, surprising myself with my directness. He laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to light up his entire face. "Guilty as charged, though I really have been to that particular villa. Garrett Blackwood," he said, extending a manicured hand. "And you must be someone who appreciates honesty, even when it's inconvenient." Penelope Morrison, and I suppose I do appreciate honesty, though I find it's increasingly rare at events like this. "Ah, a cynic. I like that in a woman. What brings you to this particular gathering of San Francisco's finest virtue signalers?" His irreverence was refreshing in a room full of polished platitudes. "My business partner believes in the power of networking. I believe in the power of good accounting practices. We're testing to see which approach generates more clients." "And what kind of accounting do you practice? Please tell me it's something more interesting than basic tax preparation." "Forensic accounting. I trace financial crimes, uncover hidden assets, follow money through complex corporate structures. Basically, I catch people who think they're too clever to get caught." Garrett's eyes lit up with what I interpreted as admiration, but now recognize as something far more calculating. "Fascinating work. You must see the worst of human nature on a regular basis." "People do terrible things for money," I agreed. "But they also leave trails. Numbers don't lie even when people do." We talked for the next hour, moving from professional topics to personal ones with surprising ease. Garrett was charming without being pushy, intelligent without being condescending, and he seemed genuinely interested in my work. When he asked for my business card, I found myself hoping he would call. He did, the very next day. Penelope, it's Garrett from Megala. I hope you don't mind me calling so soon, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about our conversation last night. My stomach fluttered in a way it hadn't since college. Which part of the conversation? All of it, really. Your passion for your work, your insights into human nature, the way you see through the pretense that most people accept without question. I was wondering if you might be free for dinner tomorrow evening. There's a small Italian place in North Beach that I think you'd appreciate. Family-owned, genuine, nothing pretentious about it. That dinner led to another, then weekend walks through Golden Gate Park, then weekend trips to Napa Valley and Monterey. Garrett was everything I had thought I wanted in a partner. Successful, cultured, attentive, and seemingly fascinated by my mind as much as anything else. You have such a unique perspective on the world, he would say, encouraging me to share stories from my most challenging cases. Most people see numbers as boring, but you see them as clues to human behavior. It's like you're a detective, but your crime scenes are spreadsheets. He was particularly interested in my methods for tracing hidden assets and following money through offshore accounts. The techniques you use could probably uncover any financial deception, he mused one evening as we walked along the Embarcadero. Someone would have to be incredibly sophisticated to hide assets from you. I found his interest flattering, rather than suspicious. Looking back, I realize he was conducting his own investigation, learning my professional strengths and blind spots, mapping the territory he would later exploit. 6 months into our relationship, Garrett began sharing details about his own work at Sterling and Associates. He portrayed himself as a successful investment advisor, managing portfolios for wealthy clients, frustrated by the limitations of working for someone else. I have such great ideas for growing client wealth, but Sterling is incredibly conservative, he complained during one of our weekend getaways to Carmel. He's more interested in steady fees than spectacular returns. I keep thinking about starting my own firm, but the startup costs are enormous. Why don't you just save up until you have enough capital? I suggested practically. It would take years, and by then the market opportunities I see now will be gone. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just being too cautious. Other advisors take bigger risks and see bigger rewards. These conversations follow a pattern I didn't recognize at the time. Garrett would present a problem, let me offer logical solutions, then explain why those solutions wouldn't work, gradually leading me toward the conclusion he wanted. He was teaching me to see his financial pressures as insurmountable challenges requiring creative solutions. 8 months after we met, he proposed during a sunset picnic overlooking the Pacific Ocean near Half Moon Bay. The ring was stunning, a vintage Art Deco design with a perfect princess-cut diamond that must have cost a fortune. Penelope Morrison, he said, dropping to one knee with theatrical flair. You are the most intelligent, beautiful, and extraordinary woman I've ever known. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife and partner in life? Through tears of joy, I said yes immediately. It never occurred to me to ask how an investment advisor who complained about money troubles could afford such an expensive ring, or why he seemed so confident that I would accept his proposal. I was too swept up in the romance of the moment to question the logistics. Our engagement period was a whirlwind of wedding planning and house hunting. Garrett insisted we needed a home that would reflect our combined success, leading us to a beautiful colonial in Millbrook Heights that stretched our budget to its limits. Image is everything in my business, he explained when I expressed concern about the mortgage payments. Clients need to see that their advisor is successful. A modest apartment doesn't inspire confidence in someone managing million-dollar portfolios. I agreed to the purchase, trusting his professional judgment and excited about starting our married life in such a beautiful home. When he suggested that he handle all our finances to simplify our lives, I readily agreed. After all, money management was his profession, and I was busy building my own business. I'll set up accounts that optimize our tax situation and investment growth, he promised. You focus on catching financial criminals, and I'll make sure our own finances are bulletproof. The irony of that statement would later make me physically ill. Our wedding in June 2019 was everything I had dreamed of. Elegant, intimate, and filled with people we loved. Garrett's colleagues from Sterling and Associates attended, along with my family and friends from the accounting world. Everyone commented on what a perfect couple we made, how lucky we were to have found each other. During his wedding speech, Garrett spoke about partnership and trust in ways that seemed deeply romantic at the time, but now sound like a criminal's manifesto. Marriage is about complete transparency, he declared, raising his champagne glass to the assembled guests. It's about sharing everything: hopes, dreams, fears, and yes, even bank account passwords. The crowd laughed at what they thought was a joke. Penelope and I have built our relationship on absolute honesty and trust. We have no secrets from each other, no hidden agendas, no separate lives. What's mine is hers, and what's hers is mine. The applause was thunderous. Several guests later told me how moved they were by his words, how rare it was to see such genuine commitment in modern marriage. If only they had known how true his words were. He really was planning to make what was mine his own. The first 3 years of our marriage seemed idyllic. My forensic accounting business grew steadily as word spread about my success in solving complex financial fraud cases. I developed a reputation for being able to trace money through the most sophisticated laundering schemes, uncover hidden assets in contentious divorces, and expose embezzlement in corporate environments. Garrett appeared to be thriving as well. He regularly brought home stories of successful investments and grateful clients, though he was always vague about specific details. Client confidentiality, he would explain when I asked follow-up questions. You understand how important discretion is in our business. I did understand, and I respected his professionalism. In retrospect, his vagueness should have been a red flag, but I was too busy with my own demanding caseload to probe deeper. Besides, our lifestyle suggested he was indeed successful. Expensive dinners, luxury vacations, designer clothes, and a BMW he surprised me with for my 30th birthday. You work so hard, and your clients rely on you to maintain a professional image, he said when I protested the extravagant gift. Besides, we can afford it. My client base has expanded significantly this year. Our social life revolved around other successful couples in our demographic, investment advisors, lawyers, doctors, and entrepreneurs who lived in similar neighborhoods and shared similar aspirations. At dinner parties and charity events, Garrett was always the center of attention, charming guests with stories and insights about the financial markets. I began to notice, however, that he was particularly interested in cultivating friendships with older couples, especially those who seemed to have significant assets but limited financial sophistication. He would spend considerable time at social events talking to elderly investors about their concerns and challenges. So many of these older folks are sitting on substantial wealth but have no idea how to protect it properly. He would tell me after these conversations. They're vulnerable to all kinds of financial predators. Someone should really look out for them. When I suggested that he could build a practice specializing in serving senior investors, he became unusually animated. That's exactly what I've been thinking. Older clients value personal relationships and trust over flashy returns. If I could find a way to reach that demographic, I could build something really special. Looking back, I realized these conversations were part of his long-term strategy. He was identifying targets while simultaneously planting the idea that helping elderly investors was a noble calling. When his crimes were eventually discovered, he would appear to be a trusted advisor who had genuinely cared about his senior clients. The first crack in our perfect facade appeared in our 4th year of marriage, though I didn't recognize it at the time. I had been working on a particularly complex embezzlement case involving a nonprofit organization when I needed to access some personal financial records for tax preparation. When I tried to log into our joint savings account, I discovered that the password had been changed without my knowledge. "Garrett," I called to him from my home office. "The password for our savings account isn't working. Did you change it recently?" He appeared in the doorway looking slightly flustered, which was unusual for him. Garrett was typically unflappable, always smooth and confident in his responses. "Oh, yes, I had to update it last week. The bank sent a security notice recommending stronger passwords after some kind of data breach concern. I meant to tell you, but forgot. The new password is Complex Security 2023, with the exclamation point." The explanation seemed reasonable, though it struck me as odd that he wouldn't have mentioned something so important. When I logged in with the new password, everything appeared normal. Our account balance was healthy, showing steady deposits from both our businesses and reasonable expenses for our lifestyle. What I didn't know was that I was looking at a carefully constructed facade. The account I was accessing was a decoy containing just enough money to maintain the illusion of financial health while our real assets were being systematically drained through accounts I didn't know existed. Around the same time, I began noticing subtle changes in Garrett's behavior. He became more secretive about his work schedule, often claiming to have evening meetings with clients or weekend conferences that required out-of-town travel. When I offered to accompany him to these events, he always had reasons why that wouldn't be appropriate. "This particular conference is very technical, focused on new SEC regulations that would bore you to tears," he would say. Or, "Mr. Henderson specifically requested a private consultation." You know how these older clients can be. They're uncomfortable discussing financial matters in front of people they don't know well. His explanations were always plausible, delivered with the same confident charm that had first attracted me to him. I had no reason to doubt his honesty, and I was usually too busy with my own demanding cases to question the details of his schedule. I was also becoming increasingly successful in my own career, which provided a convenient distraction from any concerns I might have had about our personal life. My reputation for solving complex financial crimes had reached national levels, leading to consulting opportunities with federal law enforcement agencies and high-profile corporate cases that made headlines. One case in particular consumed months of my attention and would later prove to be crucial to unraveling Garrett's schemes. I had been hired by the Harrison Technology Group to investigate suspected embezzlement by their chief financial officer. The case involved millions of dollars moved through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts, with transactions designed to look legitimate, while actually funneling money to the CFO's personal accounts. The complexity of the scheme was extraordinary. The perpetrator had created dozens of fake vendor relationships, established multiple bank accounts under similar but legally distinct business names, and timed transactions to coincide with normal business cycles to avoid detection. It was exactly the kind of sophisticated financial crime that had made my reputation. As I worked to untangle the web of deception, I found myself discussing the case with Garrett in general terms, seeking his perspective as a fellow financial professional. "A level of planning involved is incredible," I told him one evening as we shared dinner on our patio. This person had to understand not just accounting principles, but also banking regulations, international finance, and corporate law. They probably spent months setting up the infrastructure before stealing a single dollar. Garrett listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about my investigative methods and the techniques I was using to trace the hidden money. "How do you even begin to unravel something that complex?" he wondered. "It seems like the perpetrator thought of everything." "That's exactly their weakness," I explained. warming to one of my favorite professional topics. Complexity creates more evidence, not less. Every fake company needs documentation. Every bank account leaves digital traces. Every transaction creates records somewhere. The more elaborate the scheme, the more opportunities there are to find inconsistencies and contradictions. But surely some of these sophisticated criminals must get away with it, Garrett pressed. What would someone have to do to create a truly undetectable financial crime? The question seemed academic at the time, the kind of intellectual puzzle that professionals in related fields might discuss over dinner. I gave him a detailed answer about the theoretical requirements for undetectable fraud: limited scope, minimal documentation, avoiding digital trails, operating within existing legitimate structures. What I was actually doing was providing a masterclass in advanced financial crime to someone who was already in the process of implementing many of these techniques against me and my clients. The Harrison technology case took 8 months to complete, but the resolution was extremely satisfying. I not only recovered the $4.7 million that had been stolen, but also provided evidence that led to criminal charges against the CFO and 2 accomplices. The case generated significant media attention and several new high-profile clients. During the press conference announcing the resolution, I remember feeling proud of my work and grateful for the life Garrett and I had built together. He was there in the audience, beaming with what I interpreted as pride in my accomplishments. "You were magnificent up there," he told me afterward, pulling me into a congratulatory embrace. "Watching you explain how you solved that case, seeing the respect in everyone's eyes, I've never been more proud to be your husband." Now I understand that his pride had a different source entirely. He wasn't celebrating my professional success. He was marveling at how completely I trusted him, despite my expertise in detecting exactly the kinds of crimes he was committing against me. As my 5th year of marriage began, the red flags became more numerous and harder to ignore, though I continued to rationalize them away. Garrett's work schedule became increasingly erratic, with frequent last-minute changes and unexplained absences. Our social life shifted subtly but significantly, with Garrett cultivating relationships with specific types of people while distancing us from others. The most notable change was his sudden interest in befriending elderly members of our community. He volunteered to help organize events at the local senior center, joined the board of a charity focused on supporting aging adults, and began attending services at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, known for its older congregation. "I've been thinking a lot about legacy and community responsibility," he explained, when I expressed surprise at his newfound religiosity. We had never been particularly spiritual, attending church only for weddings and funerals. As we get older, I realize how important it is to give back to the generation that built the community we're enjoying. His sincerity was compelling, and I found myself admiring what appeared to be a new depth of character. When he suggested that I attend some of these events with him, I usually declined, citing work commitments, or simply feeling that his charitable activities were his personal calling. "You do so much good with your professional work," he would say. "This is my way of contributing to society. We each serve in our own ways." What I didn't realize was that these activities were elaborate prospecting operations. Garrett was systematically identifying elderly individuals with significant assets, building relationships with them, and gathering detailed information about their financial situations and vulnerabilities. His method was sophisticated and patient. He would spend months building genuine friendships with potential targets, learning about their families, health concerns, financial fears, and social connections. He became the helpful younger man who assisted with technology problems, provided transportation to medical appointments, and offered a listening ear for their concerns about money management and estate planning. Mrs. Eleanor Henderson was among his first major targets, though I wouldn't learn this until much later. She was a 78-year-old widow whose husband had left her with a substantial investment portfolio that she found overwhelming and confusing. Her children lived across the country and rarely visited, making her particularly susceptible to someone offering genuine attention and assistance. Garrett began helping Mrs. Henderson with small financial tasks, balancing her checkbook, explaining investment statements, researching Medicare supplement options. Over time, she came to trust him completely, viewing him as the son she rarely saw and the financial expert she desperately needed. "There's this lovely older woman at church, Mrs. Henderson," Garrett mentioned to me one evening. "Her late husband left her quite well off, but she's terrified of making financial mistakes. She's been asking if I know anyone who could help her understand her investments and make sure everything is properly managed." "That sounds like something she should discuss with a fee-only financial planner," I suggested. "Someone who doesn't earn commissions on product sales would give her the most objective advice." I recommended exactly that, but she's already been burned by one advisor who churned her account for commissions. She's looking for someone she can trust, someone with a personal connection rather than just a business relationship. The conversation felt natural and caring at the time. Garrett seemed genuinely concerned about helping an elderly woman navigate complex financial decisions. When he occasionally mentioned Mrs. Henderson in subsequent conversations, it was always in the context of small favors he was doing for her or concerns about her well-being. What was actually happening was far more sinister. Garrett was systematically gaining Mrs. Henderson's complete trust while gradually taking control of her financial decision-making. He convinced her that her current investment advisor was incompetent, that her bank was charging excessive fees, and that her assets needed to be moved to more secure and profitable accounts. The genius of his approach was that it built on legitimate concerns that many elderly investors actually face. Financial institutions do sometimes take advantage of seniors. Investment advisors do sometimes prioritize their own profits over client well-being. And complex financial instruments can be legitimately confusing for non-experts. By presenting himself as Mrs. Henderson's protector against these real dangers, Garrett positioned himself to commit far worse crimes while appearing to be helping her avoid them. This same pattern played out with multiple targets over the course of 18 months. Garrett would identify elderly individuals with significant assets and limited financial sophistication, build genuine relationships with them, gain their trust through small acts of kindness and assistance, then gradually take control of their financial decision-making. Meanwhile, our personal financial situation began showing strains that I found increasingly difficult to ignore. Despite our supposedly successful careers, we seemed to be constantly struggling with cash flow issues. Credit card bills were higher than expected, routine expenses required more planning than they should have, and our savings account balance remained frustratingly stagnant. When I tried to discuss these concerns with Garrett, he always had explanations that sounded reasonable, but never quite addressed my underlying worries. "The investment business is very cyclical," he would explain. "My clients pay quarterly fees, so our income tends to be lumpy. Plus, I've been reinvesting most of my profits back into growing the business, new technology, professional development, marketing expenses. It's costing us money in the short term, but it's essential for long-term growth." These explanations satisfied my logical mind, but my intuition began sending warning signals that became harder to ignore. I started paying more attention to our financial details, though Garrett's careful manipulation of our accounts meant that I could only see what he wanted me to see. The first major crack in his facade came when I received a call from our mortgage company about a missed payment. According to their records, we were 30 days past due on our home loan, which was impossible since Garrett handled all our bill payments through automatic electronic transfers. When I mentioned the call to Garrett, his reaction was slightly too intense for such a minor administrative error. "Those idiots," he said with uncharacteristic anger. "I've been dealing with a processing issue on their end for weeks. Their computer system has been misapplying payments to the wrong account numbers. I'll call them tomorrow and straighten it out." The next day, he reported that the issue had been resolved and provided a confirmation number as proof. When I called to verify, the mortgage company confirmed that our account was current and apologized for any confusion. What I didn't know was that Garrett had made a partial payment just hours before my verification call, using money from one of the accounts where he was storing stolen funds. The processing error story was complete fiction, designed to explain why we had temporarily fallen behind on major bill payments. Similar incidents began occurring with increasing frequency. There were problems with our car insurance payments, confusion about our utility bills, and discrepancies in our credit card statements. Each time, Garrett had reasonable explanations and quick solutions, but the pattern was becoming too frequent to be coincidental. I began conducting my own quiet investigation using my professional skills to examine our financial situation more carefully. What I discovered was a masterpiece of financial misdirection that I had to admire even as it terrified me. Garrett had created a complex web of accounts and transactions that made it nearly impossible to determine our true financial situation. Money flowed between checking accounts, saving accounts, investment accounts, and credit lines in patterns designed to create the illusion of financial health while actually draining our assets. The technique was similar to methods used by sophisticated embezzlers I had caught in my professional work. By keeping money in constant motion between multiple accounts, he could always point to positive balances somewhere while hiding the fact that we were actually deeply in debt. But the most disturbing discovery came when I began examining the timing of these financial manipulations. Many of the largest transfers coincided with periods when I was out of town, working on client cases, suggesting that my travel schedule was being deliberately exploited. I started keeping more detailed records of my own activities, creating a timeline that I could cross-reference with our financial transactions. The correlation was unmistakable. Every time I left town for more than 2 days, there was significant financial activity in our accounts that I had never been informed about. The implications were staggering. Not only was Garrett stealing from our joint finances, but he was timing his activities around my professional schedule. This suggested planning and premeditation that went far beyond simple marital financial deception. As I continued my investigation, another disturbing pattern emerged. Several of the elderly individuals Garrett had befriended through his charitable activities had also become clients of my forensic accounting services. Though not through any direct referral from him, Mrs. Henderson contacted my office in March, reporting suspicious activity in her investment accounts. Mr. Albert Kowalski, an 82-year-old retired engineer, hired me in April to investigate the disappearance of $200,000 from his retirement savings. Mrs. Dorothy Chen, a 75-year-old widow, sought my help in May after discovering that her late husband's life insurance proceeds had been moved to accounts she didn't recognize. At the time, I viewed these cases as fortunate coincidences. Elderly financial fraud was a growing problem, and my reputation for solving such cases naturally led to referrals within the senior community. I worked diligently on each case, applying my standard investigative techniques to trace the missing funds and identify the perpetrators. What I didn't realize was that I was actually investigating my own husband's crimes, and that each case I solved was providing him with valuable intelligence about my investigative methods and capabilities. The stolen money from these clients was being moved through exactly the kind of complex offshore structures I had described to Garrett during our dinner conversations about my professional cases. The techniques were sophisticated enough to challenge even my considerable skills, requiring months of careful work to trace the funds through multiple jurisdictions and shell companies. As I worked on these cases, I occasionally shared general details with Garrett, seeking his perspective as a fellow financial professional and using our conversations to clarify my own thinking about complex aspects of the investigations. The person behind these thefts really understands how international banking works, I told him while working on Mrs. Henderson's case. They've structured the transactions to take advantage of reporting gaps between different countries' financial systems. It's going to take months to trace all the money. Months? Garrett seemed surprised. Even with your expertise? Especially with my expertise. The perpetrator clearly understands exactly how forensic investigators work and has designed their scheme to exploit our standard methodologies. It's like they've studied our playbook and built countermeasures into their crime. These conversations were providing Garrett with real-time intelligence about how close I was getting to uncovering his scheme and what adjustments he needed to make to stay ahead of my investigation. By late summer, I had traced significant portions of the stolen funds to a complex network of offshore accounts and shell companies. The scope of the theft was enormous. At least $3.7 million stolen from 12 different elderly victims over the course of 18 months. But the most sophisticated aspect of the entire scheme was how the perpetrator had managed to use my own professional reputation to enable the crimes. Each victim had been convinced to move their money to protective accounts by someone presenting himself as a trusted associate of Penelope Morrison, the renowned forensic accountant. I had been told that I was personally overseeing the security of their assets, that the transfers were temporary protective measures while I investigated potential threats to their financial security, and that I had personally recommended the specific offshore institutions where their money was being held. The cruel genius of this approach was that it made me an unknowing accomplice in the crimes against my own clients. My reputation for integrity and expertise was being weaponized to facilitate the very financial predation I had dedicated my career to fighting. As autumn approached and I continued making progress on these interconnected cases, I began to suspect that the perpetrator was someone with intimate knowledge of my professional methods and client relationships. The crimes were too specifically tailored to my investigation techniques to be coincidental. I started maintaining more careful security around my case files and client information, suspecting that my office might have been compromised by industrial espionage or corporate competitors seeking to undermine my investigations. It never occurred to me to suspect the person sleeping beside me every night, sharing my morning coffee, and listening to my detailed accounts of every professional challenge I faced. The truth was hiding in plain sight, protected by the last place I would think to look, my own marriage. October 15th, 2023, started as one of the best days of my professional life. I was flying back from Chicago, where I had just completed a complex forensic audit for Meridian Manufacturing that had uncovered a sophisticated embezzlement scheme orchestrated by their chief financial officer and 2 department heads. The case had taken 6 months to fully investigate, involving multiple jurisdictions and requiring cooperation with federal law enforcement agencies. The perpetrators had stolen $8.3 million over 4 years through a network of shell companies and fraudulent vendor relationships. My investigation had not only exposed the crime, but also recovered most of the stolen funds and provided evidence that would lead to successful prosecutions. The client was ecstatic, the media coverage was extensive, and my reputation in the forensic accounting community had reached new heights. As my plane descended into San Francisco International Airport, I felt a deep sense of professional satisfaction and personal contentment. Garrett and I had been married for over 4 years. My business was thriving beyond my wildest expectations, and our future together seemed bright with possibilities. I had originally planned to stay in Chicago through Thursday evening, but the final client meetings had concluded earlier than expected. allowing me to catch a 2 p.m. flight instead of the red-eye I had originally booked. I decided to surprise Garrett by coming home early, perhaps ordering dinner from his favorite Thai restaurant, and celebrating the successful conclusion of the Meridian case. The flight arrived 30 minutes ahead of schedule due to favorable tailwinds, and I was walking through our front door by 6:45 p.m., nearly 4 hours earlier than Garrett expected me home. His BMW wasn't in the driveway, which wasn't unusual since he often worked late or had evening meetings with clients. Our house was quiet and dimly lit, with only the soft glow from Garrett's home office visible from the foyer. I assumed he was working late and decided to surprise him with his favorite dinner and perhaps a glass of the expensive wine we'd been saving for special occasions. As I approached his office, I could hear his voice through the partially closed door. He was on a phone call, speaking in the warm, professional tone I had grown accustomed to over the years. But as I got closer, something about his words made me stop and listen more carefully. "The Chicago timing was perfect," he was saying. "Penelope will be gone until Thursday night, which gives us a clean 48-hour window to complete the Henderson transfer and establish the new Cayman accounts." My blood turned to ice. Henderson. That was Mrs. Eleanor Henderson, one of my elderly clients, whose case I had been working on for months. And he was talking about my travel schedule as if it were part of some kind of operational planning. I pressed myself against the wall outside his office door, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain he would hear it. My professional instincts kicked in, and I activated the voice recording app on my phone, something I had learned to do automatically when encountering potential evidence of financial crimes. "No, she still has no idea," Garrett continued. "The beauty of the entire setup is that Penelope is so focused on solving everyone else's financial crimes. She doesn't pay attention to what's happening in her own accounts. We've been moving money right under the nose of the most skilled forensic accountant in the region, and she's completely clueless." The words hit me like physical blows. Not only was Garrett discussing Mrs. Henderson's case with someone else, but he was clearly involved in whatever had happened to her missing money. And his reference to her own accounts suggested that I was also being victimized in some way. "Sterling is getting nervous about the volume," Garrett went on, "but tell him we just need 6 more months to reach our target. Once we hit the 15 million mark, we execute the exit strategy. I'll file the divorce papers, complete with evidence that Penelope has been embezzling from her own clients. By the time the authorities finish investigating her, we'll be sipping drinks on a beach in the Caymans." The room seemed to spin around me. Not only was my husband stealing from vulnerable elderly people who trusted me, but he was planning to frame me for his crimes and abandon me to face the consequences while he escaped with the stolen money. "A forensic evidence will be ironclad," he continued with obvious satisfaction. "All the transfers were made using her access credentials. Her electronic signatures are on all the authorization documents, and the money trail leads directly back to accounts in her name. Who's going to believe that the expert who catches financial criminals is innocent when all the evidence points to her guilt?" I had to grip the doorframe to keep from collapsing. The magnitude of the betrayal was staggering. Not just the theft itself, but the elaborate planning to destroy my life and career while escaping responsibility for his crimes. Plus, there's a certain poetic justice to it, Garrett added with a chuckle that made my skin crawl. She spent years lecturing me about the importance of financial ethics and transparency. Now she'll get to experience firsthand what it feels like to be on the other side of a financial investigation. I backed away from the office door as quietly as possible, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I needed to get out of the house before Garrett discovered I had returned early and overheard his conversation. Moving as silently as possible, I made it to the kitchen and grabbed my car keys with trembling fingers. My mind was reeling with the implications of what I had learned, but my professional training was already beginning to assert itself. This was a crime scene now, and I was both a victim and a potential witness. I needed to preserve evidence and think strategically about my next moves. I drove aimlessly through our neighborhood for nearly an hour, processing what I had learned and beginning to formulate a plan. During that hour of aimless driving through the darkened streets of San Francisco, I forced myself to compartmentalize the emotional devastation and think like the forensic accountant I had trained to be, rather than the shattered wife I had just become. The rain had started again, matching my internal storm, but the methodical clicking of my windshield wipers provided a strange rhythm that helped organize my thoughts. Garrett's plan was diabolical in its sophistication. He hadn't just stolen money, he had constructed an elaborate frame that would make me appear guilty of the very crimes he was committing. But he had made one crucial mistake that would prove to be his downfall. He had underestimated my professional capabilities and overestimated his own cleverness. After all, I had built my entire career on catching people who thought they were too smart to get caught. I pulled into the parking lot of Mel's Diner on Geary Boulevard, a 24-hour establishment where the fluorescent lighting was harsh enough to keep me alert, and the coffee strong enough to fuel what I knew would be a very long night. Sitting in a corner booth with my laptop and a legal pad, I began making a mental inventory of what I knew, what I suspected, and what I needed to prove. The recorded conversation was compelling evidence of Garrett's criminal intent. But I knew it wouldn't be admissible in court since it had been obtained without his knowledge or consent. However, it provided a crucial roadmap for my investigation and confirmed the growing suspicions I had been trying to suppress about the pattern of elderly client thefts that had been consuming my professional attention for months. My first call was to Miranda Chen, no relation to my eventual police contact, though they shared both a surname and an unwavering commitment to justice. Miranda had been my business partner for 8 years, ever since we had both left positions at major accounting firms to start our own forensic practice. She was one of the few people in the world I trusted completely, and I knew she would drop everything to help me navigate this nightmare. Penelope? Jesus, it's almost midnight. I thought you were in Chicago until tomorrow evening. I came back early and walked straight into hell, Miranda. I need your help, and I can't explain everything over the phone. Can you meet me at the office? This is urgent, more urgent than anything we've ever worked on. Of course, give me 20 minutes to get dressed, and I'll meet you there. Miranda arrived at our downtown office to find me already deep into examining our client files, cross-referencing financial records, and building timeline charts on the conference room whiteboard. She took one look at my face, probably red-eyed and pale with shock, and immediately knew that something catastrophic had occurred. What happened? You look like someone died. In a way, someone did. The man I married, the man I thought I knew, that person never existed. Miranda, Garrett is the one who's been stealing from our elderly clients. All of them. Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Kowalski, Mrs. Chen, the Patterson couple, the Washingtons, the Rodriguezes. He's been systematically targeting them for over 18 months, and he's been using my reputation and professional credentials to gain their trust. Miranda sank into a chair, her face cycling through disbelief, shock, and dawning horror as the implications began to register. That's impossible, Penelope. Garrett doesn't even have access to our client information, and he's never shown any interest in your cases beyond normal spousal support. He barely asks about your work. That's exactly what I thought too, but he's been gathering information through me, listening carefully to my case discussions, learning about my investigative methods, and using everything I told him during our dinner conversations to stay one step ahead of my own investigations. I've been providing a masterclass in advanced financial crime detection to the very person who is using that knowledge to victimize my clients. I played the recorded conversation for Miranda, watching her expression change from disbelief to horror to white-hot anger as the full scope of Garrett's betrayal became clear. When the recording ended, she sat in silence for nearly a minute before speaking. "The calculating bastard," she whispered, her voice shaking with rage. $15 million. And he's planning to frame you for his own crimes? This isn't just theft, Penelope. This is a systematic plan to destroy your life and career while he disappears with stolen money. It gets worse. Based on some financial irregularities I've been noticing, I think he's been manipulating our personal finances too, probably stealing from our joint accounts while making it look like legitimate business expenses or investment losses. I need to conduct a complete forensic audit of every account, every transaction, every financial record connected to our marriage and our household. Miranda rolled up her sleeves with grim determination. Then that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to take this son of a bitch down using every technique we've ever learned, and we're going to make sure he pays for every dollar he's stolen and every life he's destroyed. We worked through the night, fueled by black coffee and righteous anger, applying the same meticulous techniques I had used to solve corporate fraud cases to examine my own financial life. What we discovered was a masterpiece of long-term financial manipulation that had begun almost from the day Garrett and I were married and had grown increasingly sophisticated over time. The pattern was breathtakingly complex and demonstrated a level of patience and planning that spoke to Garrett's sociopathic nature. Rather than stealing large amounts at once, which might have triggered my professional suspicions, he had been systematically diverting small percentages of our income, inflating our routine expenses, and creating fictional investment losses that actually represented money transferred to accounts under his sole control. "Look at this series of transactions from our main investment account," Miranda said, pointing to a spreadsheet she had created to track the irregularities. "These entries show significant losses from high-risk stock trades, but when I cross-reference them with actual market data from those dates, these particular trades never happened. The money just disappeared into thin air. And look here," I added, highlighting another disturbing pattern with a yellow marker. "Every time I received a large fee payment from a client, the Morrison Industries case, the Patel family divorce investigation, the Rodriguez embezzlement matter, there was a corresponding tax payment or business expense that reduced our net household income by almost exactly the same amount. He's been stealing my earnings in real time and making me think we were just breaking even financially." By dawn, we had documented over $400,000 in theft from our personal accounts over the 4.5 years of our marriage. The thefts had started small, maybe $500 here and there disguised as computer equipment or professional development expenses, but had grown bolder and more sophisticated as Garrett became confident that I wasn't paying attention to our personal finances. But this personal theft was nothing compared to what he had stolen from the vulnerable elderly clients who had trusted him because of his connection to me. As we cross-referenced the dates of my out-of-town business trips, with unusual financial activity involving my elderly clients, a sickening pattern emerged. Every single major theft corresponds to a period when you are traveling for work, Miranda observed grimly. He's been using your professional schedule as operational cover for his crimes. When you were in Denver working on the Hartwell case, Mrs. Patterson's retirement funds disappeared. When you were in Portland for the Noyne investigation, Mr. Kowalski lost his life savings. It's like he's been treating your calendar as a criminal opportunity matrix. The psychological manipulation involved was staggering. Garrett had not only been stealing money, he had been systematically exploiting my dedication to my work and my clients' trust in my professional reputation to facilitate crimes that would ultimately destroy both. "A question now," Miranda said, as we reviewed our preliminary findings in the gray morning light filtering through the office windows, is how do we expose him without triggering his exit strategy? If he realizes you know about his crimes, he'll accelerate his timeline and disappear with the money before we can recover it or bring him to justice. We need to build an absolutely airtight case that can be presented to law enforcement all at once, I replied, my mind already working through the legal and logistical requirements. If we tip our hand too early, he'll destroy evidence and vanish into whatever escape plan he's been developing. But if we wait too long, more innocent people will be victimized, and he might complete his frame job against me. How long do you think we have? Based on what I heard in that phone conversation, he's planning to reach $15 million in stolen funds before executing his exit strategy. According to my rough calculations from what we've discovered so far, he's probably at around 12 to 12.5 million now, which means we have maybe 4 to 6 weeks before he implements whatever disappearing act he's been planning. I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. I would return home and pretend that nothing had changed between us, while secretly building the most important case of my career, the case that would determine whether justice would be served, or whether I would be destroyed by the man I had trusted with my heart and my life. The next 6 weeks were the most psychologically challenging period of my life. Every morning, I woke up beside a man who was actively planning to destroy me. Every evening, I shared dinner and conversation with someone who was stealing from vulnerable elderly people who trusted me. Every night, I fell asleep next to a criminal who was using my own professional reputation to enable increasingly sophisticated financial predation. But I had advantages that Garrett didn't realize, and I was determined to use every one of them. My professional expertise in financial investigation was now matched by my growing understanding of his psychological manipulation techniques. I could see through his lies because I finally knew what he was lying about, and I could anticipate his moves because I understood his ultimate objective. The key to maintaining my cover was continuing to behave exactly as I always had, matching my normal patterns of conversation, affection, and daily routine so precisely that Garrett would have no reason to suspect anything had changed. I discussed my work cases with him, just as I always had, shared details about my investigative techniques and challenges, and maintained our normal social calendar and household routines. But now every interaction served a dual purpose. Where I had once sought emotional support and intellectual partnership, I was now gathering intelligence about his criminal operation and psychological state. "How is the Henderson case progressing?" he asked one evening as we shared Thai takeout on our back patio, his voice carrying exactly the right note of supportive spousal interest that had once made me feel cherished and understood. "Frustratingly slowly," I replied, which was actually the truth from a certain perspective. The money trail is incredibly complex, and whoever is behind this clearly understands how forensic investigations work. Every time I think I'm getting close to identifying the perpetrator, I discover another layer of misdirection and obfuscation. "Maybe you're overthinking it," Garrett suggested with what appeared to be genuine concern. Sometimes the simplest explanation turns out to be the correct one, even in cases that seem complex on the surface. "Maybe you're right, but this feels different from other cases I've worked. It's almost like the criminal has been studying my specific investigative methods and designing their scheme to exploit my standard approaches and blind spots. I've never encountered anything quite this sophisticated or personally targeted." These conversations served multiple purposes simultaneously. They maintained the illusion that nothing fundamental had changed between us, while providing me with valuable insights into how Garrett's criminal mind worked and what his next moves might be. Every question he asked revealed something about his concerns or knowledge gaps, and every suggestion he made helped me understand how he viewed my investigative capabilities. Meanwhile, Miranda and I were conducting the most intensive and personally motivated forensic investigation of our careers, working nights and weekends, often meeting in coffee shops or her apartment to avoid any possibility of discovery. We systematically traced the stolen funds through dozens of accounts, identified the shell companies and offshore structures Garrett had established, and documented the methodical nature of his crimes against both our clients and our marriage. The scope of the operation continued to expand as we dug deeper. Garrett had victimized at least 22 elderly individuals over the past 18 months, stealing amounts ranging from $75,000 to $850,000, depending on each victim's available assets and psychological vulnerability. His total theft now appeared to exceed $13.8 million, making it one of the largest elder fraud cases in California history. But the most psychologically disturbing aspect of our investigation was discovering exactly how he had used my reputation and professional relationships to facilitate these crimes. Each victim had been told a carefully crafted story about imminent threats to their financial security that required immediate protective action, supervised personally by me. Mrs. Henderson gave me a detailed account of her conversations with Garrett. Miranda reported during one of our clandestine meetings in Golden Gate Park, where we could speak freely without fear of electronic surveillance. He told her that you had discovered evidence of a sophisticated fraud ring targeting elderly investors in her neighborhood, that her accounts were specifically at risk, and that immediate action was necessary to protect her life savings from criminals who had already begun probing her financial information. The cruelty of this approach was breathtaking in its calculated effectiveness. Garrett wasn't just stealing money. He was exploiting the very real fears and vulnerabilities that many elderly people experience about financial security in an increasingly complex and digital world. He was presenting himself as their protector and me as their guardian angel, while actually being the predator they feared most. He showed her what appeared to be official documents with your letterhead and electronic signature, Miranda continued, authorizing the transfer of her funds to special, protected accounts that would be monitored by federal authorities until the threat was neutralized. She was terrified and grateful when he offered to handle all the paperwork and coordination personally. As we gathered more evidence and interviewed additional victims, the pattern became even clearer and more disturbing. Garrett had been systematically identifying elderly individuals who were isolated, financially comfortable but unsophisticated, and psychologically vulnerable to authority figures and fear-based manipulation. His victim selection process was methodical and patient. Through his volunteer work at the Senior Center, his involvement with aging-focused charities, and his regular attendance at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, he had spent months building genuine relationships with potential targets, learning about their family situations, health concerns, financial fears, and social connections. He became the helpful younger man who assisted with technology problems, provided transportation to medical appointments, offered a listening ear for their concerns about money management, and gradually positioned himself as a trusted advisor and surrogate family member. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated enough to have impressed criminal psychologists. Garrett would spend weeks or even months building trust and dependency relationships before introducing any financial component. When he finally did suggest that protective action was needed, it came in the context of months of established caring and helpfulness. Mrs. Dorothy Yamamoto described the process in detail. Miranda reported after interviewing our 7th confirmed victim. Garrett had been helping her with grocery shopping and minor home repairs for 4 months before he mentioned any concerns about her financial security. By the time he suggested moving her money to protected accounts, she trusted him completely and viewed him as the caring son she never had. As we continued documenting the scope of Garrett's crimes, I began reaching out carefully to law enforcement contacts I had worked with on previous cases. Detective Sarah Chen of the San Francisco Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit had collaborated with me on several complex investigations and trusted my professional judgment implicitly. What you're describing sounds like an extremely sophisticated elder fraud operation, Detective Chen said when I presented our initial findings during a discreet meeting at a downtown coffee shop. But you need to understand that much of the evidence you've gathered against your husband would be considered circumstantial in a criminal prosecution. We need something more concrete and legally admissible to justify arrests and asset seizures. I understand the legal requirements, and I'm working on gathering that evidence. Give me 2 more weeks to complete the financial documentation trail, and I'll have proof that meets prosecutorial standards for every aspect of the scheme. Penelope, I have to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully about your answer, Detective Chen said, her expression serious and concerned. Are you emotionally and psychologically prepared for what happens next? Once we move forward with this investigation, your marriage is over. Your husband will likely face federal charges and decades in prison, and your personal life will become a matter of public record. This isn't just about solving another case anymore. This is about destroying the life you thought you had built. The question forced me to confront the emotional reality of what I was doing and the permanent consequences of my choices. Despite everything Garrett had done, despite the evidence of his systematic betrayal and criminal manipulation, part of me still remembered the charming, attentive man who had swept me off my feet 5 years earlier at the Pemberton Charity Gala. But I had come to understand that the person I remembered had never really existed. He had been a carefully constructed persona designed to facilitate long-term criminal activity and personal financial exploitation. The man I had married was a fiction created by a sociopathic predator who viewed other human beings as resources to be exploited rather than people deserving of love, respect, and honesty. My marriage ended the moment I discovered what he was really doing, I replied with more certainty than I actually felt. Now I'm just making sure he faces appropriate consequences for his actions and that his victims have a chance to recover what he stole from them. 2 weeks before Garrett's projected exit date, based on our analysis of his financial patterns and the timeline he had mentioned in the recorded phone conversation, Miranda and I had assembled a comprehensive case file that documented every discoverable aspect of his criminal operation. The evidence filled 3 large binders and included detailed financial records tracing stolen funds through multiple jurisdictions and shell companies, recorded interviews with 12 confirmed victims describing how they had been psychologically manipulated, expert analysis of the offshore account structures and money laundering techniques, and a comprehensive timeline showing how the crimes had been carefully coordinated with my professional travel schedule. But we still needed one final piece of evidence that would make our case absolutely bulletproof. Concrete proof that Garrett was actively planning to frame me for his crimes and flee the country with the stolen money. Everything else we had gathered was strong circumstantial evidence, but we needed direct evidence of his exit strategy to ensure successful prosecution and asset recovery. The opportunity came when Garrett announced that he needed to make an unexpected business trip to Miami to meet with a group of potential new clients who represented a significant expansion opportunity for his investment advisory practice. It's very last minute, which I hate, but this could be a major breakthrough for our financial future, he explained over dinner, his performance of excited anticipation flawlessly convincing. A consortium of retired executives who are looking for sophisticated asset management services. If I can land this account, it could set us up financially for years and give me the capital base I need to really expand the business. Based on our investigation, I knew this Miami trip was almost certainly connected to the final implementation of his exit strategy, possibly involving the establishment of ultimate destination accounts, where the completion of major money transfers, that would put the stolen funds beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement. This would be my only chance to gather the direct evidence we needed to complete our case and ensure that Garrett faced justice for his crimes, rather than escaping to enjoy the proceeds of his systematic theft and betrayal.